Vince is the third alternative. Survivor's Guilt, the Secret Service and the JFK Murder. It's newly updated and republished by JFK Lancer. And it is irreplaceable in discovering what was uniquely insecure about Dallas and about Dealey Plaza. And Vince continues his superior research with anticipated, even more meaningful discoveries. Vince Palamara.
Thanks for that intro, George Michael. Well, basically what it boils down to, pure and simple, is if the Secret Service would have done their usual thorough job, we wouldn't be here today, 34 years later. You know, whether we take the view that we all do in this room is a conspiracy or the other side of the fence, Secret Service would have did their job, and when you look at it. Basically, while it's a relatively easy task to point out the Secret Service's general deficiencies in regard to the tragic events of November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, Texas, it has been a more difficult feat to lay bare all the specific things that were wrong in regard to security. This has been achieved primarily through a combination of luck, hard work, and perhaps most importantly, dealing with primary sources, meaning documents, and primary people, meaning the actual former agents themselves. However, one very important and significant element has been missing up to now, due in no small part to the constant evolution of my own thinking on the subject. Who in the agency benefited, who did not, and just how were these lapses in security allowed to happen? After discarding the options of just mere innocence, guilt, negligence, and more recently, the notion of a benign security stripping test that backfired into the assassination, I have now come to the firm conclusion, based on 7+ years of heavy primary source research and numerous interviews, 21+ and counting, that the Secret Service actions and inactions in Dallas were due largely to a significant breakdown in both the chain of command and the respective superior authority. In addition, I believe a malignant test of President security was involved on or around November 22nd, 1963, with the actual intent to harm or embarrass President Kennedy, rather than merely shaking him into seeing the Secret Service need more funds, equipment, and personnel, because these are benefits which would have arose out of any kind of attempt on JFK, successful or otherwise. Furthermore, it is now my strong belief, after shaking off years of equivocation, that several agents had to have been involved in the actual conspiracy, repeat that again, had to have been involved, by getting wind of the impending threat and letting it happen. Not by an unruly mob out to treat Kennedy like Adlai Stevenson, which was the byproduct of a malignant test, which was going on at the same time, but by a flurry of shells, to quote Agent Kellerman, in a much different kind of context. So if Dallas was the Super Bowl, which I think is a very appropriate analogy here, then the game was not merely rigged, it was fixed from the very start by a combination of inexperienced third stringers and bench warmers. These men, knowingly or unknowingly, let the assassination happen through sheer incompetence, inexperience, and a desire to usurp the authority presented by the chain of command, whether those in this command were present in Texas or out of the loop in another part of the country at the crucial moment or moments. Key elements of this team chose to call their own plays in Dallas, and just as in the game of football, the consequences of defeat can wreak havoc on general management, treasury officials, the coaches, meaning the brass, and ultimately certain players, the actual agents themselves. A look at the consequences of Dallas, this breakdown of the infrastructure of the Secret Service, is now in order. Somebody shut off these front lights here. Anybody else will begin? Okay. It's one thing for me to describe my interviews and my evidence. I think that having an audio-visual presentation will accent that for you. And,
back to November 22nd, 1963. You were on the fender of the Secret Service car right behind President Kennedy's car. At the first shot, you ran forward and jumped on the back of the President's car in less than 2 seconds, pulling Mrs. Kennedy down into her seat, protecting. She climbed out the back and she was on the way back because of the fact that part of her husband's head had been shot off and gone off to the street. She wasn't trying to climb out of the car. She was simply trying to reach that head part there to bring it back. That's the only thing. Was there anything that the Secret Service or that Clint Hill could have done to keep that from happening? Yes. Clint Hill, yes, what do you mean? If he had reacted about 5/10 of a second faster, or maybe a second faster, I wouldn't be here then. You mean you would have gotten there and you would have taken the shot? The third shot, yes, sir. And that would have been all right with you. That would have been fine with me. But you couldn't. You got there in less than 2 seconds, Clint. You couldn't have gotten there. You surely don't have any sense of guilt about that. Yes, I certainly do. It's my fault. Oh. No one has ever suggested that for an instant. If I had reacted just a little bit quicker, and I could have, I guess, I would have put that to my grave.
Clint Hill suffered deeply after Dallas, and he took early retirement. He still suffers from those few fateful moments.
Clint was truly a victim of survivor's guilt, truly a victim of what went on. Here's the rear of the limousine and the side platforms. The side platforms were not used very infrequently because they injured spectators and the agents themselves. The rear platforms is what was important. This is like a potpourri of footage from the JFK library and other sources. Men on the rear of the limousine. We just heard a presentation this morning of how important the men in the fallout car were, and at the very least obscuring any rearward assassin. Well, the men would have been doing their job that day and been on the rear of the limousine would have made a big difference. Here we are, that's Roy Kellerman on the left. Okay, and here we go again. That's Chuck Saboro, Don Lawton, there's Jerry Bain. This was especially in charge of the White House detail. There's Winston Lawson there. And this is the trip to Italy, trip to Ireland. What these clips here focus on, this first part, are agents on the rear of the limousine primarily. Something that was a common occurrence. President Kennedy never told the agents not to ride on the back of the limousine or on the sides or anything else. This is pure mythology, pure and simple. Special agent charged of the White House detail, Jerry Bain, told me that never happened. Floyd Boring said that never happened. And roughly about 11 or 12 other agents I spoke to, it's in my book, you can see that for yourself, but it's been debunked. No ifs, ands, or buts. No equivocation, never. However, the Warren Report, William Manchester, and Jim Bishop all created a mythology that President Kennedy was the most difficult president to protect, and this spawned this. This is the bubble top, obviously. And again, President Kennedy allegedly never wanted the bubble top. Well, here again, here's the potpourri. This is 3 weeks before Dallas, here from the JFK Library. Okay, here's another clip coming up. We're going to leave the volume turned up at the now time. Okay, here's the motorcycles here. And again, President Kennedy allegedly, if you remember your reading, did not like to have motorcycles next to him. The day before, he was offered 18 motorcycles, 4 on each side, common occurrence. And yet, on the meeting on November 21st, David Grant, Secret Service agent who joined Win Lawson at the very end, said that President Kennedy would not like this. This is a photograph. See, that was Fort Worth in the morning of the 22nd. This is Chuck Zaboro and Don Lawton. This is 4 days before Dallas. There's the motorcycles. I interviewed, oh, you want to turn up the volume now. This is an interview with Secret Service agent Winston Lawson here.
I was in charge of that advance, and I arrived first. The second advance person that was going to be later helping me in Dallas didn't arrive when I did. He didn't arrive until just a few days before the event. The advance person that was going to be later helping me in Dallas didn't arrive when I did. He didn't arrive until
That's David Grant.
a few days before.
David Grant is a little-known person in this story, and actually has a lot to do with what did and did not happen in Dallas security-wise. He joined the team of Lawson and Sorrells. Today, a lot of these so-called security desires on the part of President Kennedy. And everybody thinks of Lawson and Sorrells, but again, we'll listen to what Winston Lawson has to say here.
In truth, not only in my mind, I was the one and only first advance agent then and even to this day that ever lost a president from the Secret Service, an advance person who was going to be later helping me in Dallas, didn't arrive.
And yet he takes full responsibility
Until
later on in the interview. And yet we know, it's in documentation, David Green joined him on November 18th.
Advance agent then and even to this day that ever lost a president from the Secret Service. I'm sure there are many outfits, organizations where I've been fired or perhaps transferred to the boondocks, but they kept me working. I worked at President Kennedy's funeral, was near the gravesite. I didn't mean it in that.
His fellow agents said to me,
When if it hadn't happened, I'm glad it happened to you. And they really didn't mean that in a bad way. They knew that I had done everything that I could, that I had done everything that we were doing at that time.
meantime, David Grant went on to have a successful career in the Secret Service, became an advanced man under Nixon. And when Lawson was basically relegated to administrative work, this deeply broke the man. I spoke to him in September of '92, and he basically confirmed a lot of my research. The decision had a lot to do with them going to the Trade Mart. It came out of the Trade Mart of the Women's Building. Well, the Trade Mart determined the speed of the route itself, and the security of the building itself. This is a closed sedan. Winston Lawson and Sheriff Decker and Chief Curry were in, and translation useless. A closed sedan is lead car. This is Roger Craig, Deputy Sheriff.
And he instructed us that we were to stand out in front and in no way take part in the security of that motorcade. That we were merely spectators and nothing more.
Did that seem unusual to you?
It did to me at the time because there were so many people around and so few Dallas police officers. This is one of the first things I noticed was the lack of Dallas police officers. Trying to keep the people back.
Up to the point that the whole day became great frustration for a photographic person. First thing, parades were usually kind of a flatbed truck for crew and certain selected photographic personnel to ride in front of the presidential car on presidential parades.
And here's some examples exclusively from the JFK Library. The press always was in front of the limousine. Standard stuff. The pole, national and international press was there. President Kennedy didn't have anything to do with this either. And they usually rode a flatbed truck. Here they are in Germany, a little bit of a higher truck here. It's an actual truck as opposed to like a small pickup. But just another example. And again, I had to do a lot of digging at the Kennedy Library. This stuff is not readily available. It's usually on government services, promo films, motorcades, it's ancillary. And again, you'll see, this is Tom Dillard again. Little known thing he reveals here.
First thing,
This is the whole thing.
parades were usually kind of a flatbed truck for crew and certain selected photographic personnel to ride in front of the presidential car on presidential parades. That was canceled at the last minute. We were put in Chevrolet convertibles to ride several cars back. I think we were about 6 cars, Bob Jackson and I, and a couple of the boys were in this parade. And then that put us totally out of the picture. The parade
Boston actually.
And a little clip of Bill Moyers. The only thing I could find of Bill Moyers, Bill Moyers was an LBJ aide, as you know. Well, he had a hand in the Secret Service in the printing of the parade route. And Chief Rowley, after the fact, said the Secret Service does not release the routes of motorcades to the press and would not and did not in Dallas. And yet, lawyers before the House Select Committee said it was on the authority of the Secret Service agent in charge of the Dallas trip. Well, if you take that literally, the Secret Service agent in charge of the Dallas trip was none other than Assistant Special Agent in charge Floyd Ward, who was not in Dallas. Dallas was replete with a lot of third stringers in place of a lot of the chiefs. Roy Kellerman was a third stringer who was making his first major trip on his own. Malcolm Killup, the press secretary, was a third stringer making his first.
Kennedy.
In the review. This is Benny Forsley Harris, also
Later that morning in Dallas, she urged the Secret Service to take the famous bubble top off the presidential car so the crowds could see Kennedy.
A few years before I found out that the bubble top would not deflect a bullet, much like the top one. But I used to wake up in the middle of the night thinking, if only I had done something else. I had not done what I did.
President Kennedy made the decision not to have the top on the presidential limousine in Dallas. Putting aside concerns about hostility, Kennedy ordered that the bullet-resistant bubble top be removed from his limousine. In retrospect, that directive became perhaps the most tragic single order ever given by a president on board Air Force One. For all America and the world.
22nd, 1963.
This is amazing. This is James Clark House. It's all story.
We visited the airport in a Lincoln Continental convertible. The sun was shining. It was a beautiful day. He was the factory president. His wife was accompanying him on this trip. And there was a motorcade through downtown Dallas.
It was a wonderful event.
Kennedy's spirits were
This is what you have to deal with.
Next, the day was sunny and bright. The bubble top of the limousine was removed.
Mr. President, we were trying to make a decision whether to leave the bubble top.
This is the truth.
Sky is broke, and Side said, well, there's a decision right there, no tops, because we were there on a political motorcade, on a political motorcade, and President Kennedy wanted to meet the people.
Are you responsible for the bubble top going on the car? You are, okay. Because one of the things that supposedly here again, JFK said, get that, I'm quoting now, get that goddamn bubble top off unless it's raining. There was that comment. That is not true. Like Ford Sorrells ordered the bubble top off. Who? Ford Sorrells. Ford Sorrells, I know him very well. He's the agent in charge of Dallas. He had nothing to do with it. Okay, very good. I am the sole responsibility of that. You can see Jim Lehrer, he came up with a book called The Boss of My Own, and he claims that he heard Ford Sorrells.
And it was moving with, as has been reported, the bubble top of the presidential car down. This may have been a tragic mistake.
But was killed. The Secret Service agents normally walk directly beside the car on either side. We do not see any in this photograph.
The newsman knew something about that day.
2 or 3 Secret Service agents will walk on
They
either side
knew.
of the car.
This clip is repeated, so there's no problem. This will come right back. They knew something was up with the bubble top of the was not behind or beside the limousine. And here we go again with this clip.
Also, the fact that one of the Secret Service agents was killed. The Secret Service agents normally walk directly beside the car on either side. We do not see any in this photograph, but usually 2 or 3 Secret Service agents will walk on either side of the car so that they are there to spot anyone who looks like a troublemaker.
Motorcycle police not flank his car, but stayed at the front and back. Police not flank his car, but stayed at the front and back. The limousine was removed. He had insisted that no Secret Service men ride on the back bumper or side running boards, and that motorcycle police not flank his car, but stayed at the front and back. Not flank his car, but stayed at the front and back. The limousine was removed. He had insisted that no Secret Service men ride on the back bumper or side running boards, and that motorcycle police, not
It's like a
flank his car,
mantra through the
but
years.
stay to the front
Manchester,
and back.
Bishop, the Warren Report, everything you read about President Kennedy is not true. This clip and what that is, that's fine. We're talking about, this is President Kennedy's arrival, Love Field. You'll see something pretty amazing coming up here. Again, I interviewed these Secret Service agents, and they said there was no truth to President Kennedy making requests to either have the bubble top removed, have the motorcycles depleted down from 18 down to 4, that weren't even flagging him in Dallas, to have the parade route changed, to have the destination as the trademark, on and on, the press being removed from the usual position in front and behind the limousine. And again, it comes down to the $60 million questions. Okay, well, if they're telling you all this now, they're interviewing you through your interviews, well, what's the story with all these documents? Well, that's where it gets down to. This was the quagmire I've been in for the last few years. Okay, then what is the ultimate story? I think what it boils down to is there were a few agents, and I'm going to name them here for the first time. I believe Floyd Boring, Emery Roberts, and Bill Greer are the 3 Secret Service agents who were sinisterly involved in Kennedy's murder. Bill Greer was the driver of the presidential limousine. I will get to him in a moment. Floyd Boring was number 2 man, assistant special agent in charge of the White House detail, in charge of planning the Texas trip. I spoke to him twice. And Emery Roberts, who was the commander of the follow-up car in Dallas, a normal duty he had. He was one of the 3 shift leaders of the White House detail. And I spoke to Arthur Godfrey, who was one of the 3 shift leaders of the White House detail, along with Emery Roberts and Stu Stott. All 3 of them were on the Texas trip. And he basically told me in no uncertain terms that with himself, being Godfrey meaning, he was in Austin. And he said, well, you know, really, he didn't use these words, but basically he was more or less out of the picture, out of the loop. And it basically boils down to Emery Roberts was basically in control of the nerve center of this follow-up car. There's Henry Ripka, an agent who rode in the follow-up car, was a protective agent in San Antonio, Houston, and Fort Worth, November 21st and November 22nd. This is different angles of them leaving Love Field. This is John Reddy, Paul Landis, and here they are leaving Love Field. Henry Ripka, thinking he's going to be doing what he just did the last few stops. And this is when Emery Roberts rises in his seat in the follow-up car and with some hand gestures basically tells him to cease and desist from his actions. Paul Landis is even making room for him on the follow-up car. And this is when you'll see Henry Ripka. I think his picture says 1,000 words. Well, this is about as close as you can get here.
Wow.
Pretty crazy. And the most amazing thing of all is the fact that there are not 1 report, not 2 reports, but 3 reports after the fact placing Ripka in the follow-up car when he wasn't there. Again, either they assume he did hop on the car or it's cover-up. Take your pick. There's Paul Landis, make room for him.
And the third gesture.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah. And again, when you see this clip normally, it's normally, you know, real time, it goes by quick. There's Emery Roberts right there in case you want a little closer look at him. One of the shift leaders of the White House detail. And this is a little bit of a blow-up I did here. There's him rising in the seat again. And the camera angles do change. This is from ABC's WFA footage here. So the camera angle does shift like that. That's why I had to do this. There's his hand gestures. And again, you'll see Henry Ripka. Henry Ripka is since deceased. Try to locate his family. I've been unsuccessful to date. And here's a little interesting thing. Seymour Hersh, that Charlie brought up. Well, he interviewed Tim McIntyre. Well, Tim McIntyre was pretty lackadaisical that day because this is them just a few blocks away, and he's just sharing a little joke here with Clint Hill on the rear of the follow-up car. This is repeated to this little, this will be, yeah, here it's coming. Okay. They're sharing a little joke back and forth. What happens if an assassin starts to shoot right now? You might think just a minor point. Well, it's pretty, at the very least, you could say that of the agents who I do not think were sinisterly involved, I already named Floyd Boring, Emery Roberts, and Bill Greer. The other agents who I think were involved in what I would call a malignant test of the president's security, stripping his security in order to invoke a scenario like what happened to Adlai Stevenson, our United Nations ambassador, in late October '63, was embarrassed, humiliated upon the whole world, spit upon, hit with a placard, and I think that that situation was set up for Dallas. Yet, there was a few agents who I think were quote-unquote innocent, Clint Hill being one of them. That's why I started this tape out. I think that's like one of those poignant interviews showing survivors' guilt. And the most interesting thing of all is Clint Hill was assigned to Jackie, was a last-minute addition to the trip. You heard Jim Morris tell us that yesterday, that's the truth. And it should have been John Reddy who's crying those tears. He was assigned to JFK. He was on JFK's side on that running board. Imagine history would have been changed if those men would have been on the rear of that limousine. Or at the very least, see, I'm allowing ways out, or at the very least they would have been allowed to run towards the limousine. This is Tim McIntyre interviewed by CNN. Up an A shot, he's injured, there's Jackie's left hand. Well, there's Emory Roberts again. And you know what he's doing? He's talking on the microphone. Well, what's the problem with that? Well, there's a big problem. In his Secret Service reports, he mentions a radio transmission a full minute before they're even on Elm Street. And he mentions the reports where he got on the radio afterwards, after the shooting's all done and they're trying to go to Parkland. Yeah, what about that radio transmission right during that time period? There's 5 agents, Roy Kellerman being one of them, that assumed responsibility for them going to Parkland Hospital. And yet there's only one channel that's working, 4 of them are lying. Why? Just like with the bubble top, why the multiple responsibility? If this is so clear cut, why is there all these stories? Everybody's taking responsibility here. And this is amazing, you know, this is a Bruder film. Again, we think we've seen things a million times over. You know, we're always concentrating on JFK and Jackie, even the Conleys. But again, Bill Greer, the suspect number 3, looks back 2 times, disobeys a direct order from Roy Kellerman, even in the testimony, says, get out of line, we've been hit. Kellerman said that Greer then looked in the back of the car. Maybe he didn't believe me. And for the second time, well, Roy Kellerman's getting on the microphone rather than doing anything constructive. Bill Greer's looking back for a second time. And the fatal shot will make its mark. And that's basically the coup de grace. You had Emory Roberts immobilizing everybody in the follow-up car. And forgive me for being out of sequence here about one thing. Emory Roberts, in addition to recalling Henry Ripke at Louisville, which you saw, he also ordered the men not to move during the shooting sequence. What happened was there was a statement in the book, High Treason, that said Emory Roberts ordered the men not to move after the first shot sounded. And I thought that that was exaggerated. Well, I spoke to Sam Kenny, because Emory Roberts is deceased, and I said, well, is that true? Sam Kenny being the driver of the clock car. He said, absolutely right. I said, what? He said, yeah, absolutely right. I said, you mean before the first shot? I mean, during the first shot? You mean after the fatal shot? He said, no, during the first shot. He said, Emory Roberts isn't around to defend himself, and I don't think you should basically go any further with this. And Bill Greer normally took a look back at the president, which he denied ever doing. And maybe we have this sign up here. This is Bo Byers talking about, there's a little short series of clips of people talking about Bill Greer.
I can understand. Yes, it's working. I'm going to jump to the Dealey Plaza. I was on the White House Press bus. I remember, matter of fact, I've had nightmares about it, of the sunlight on Kennedy and the explosion, the car almost coming to a stop, almost to a dead stop, and then accelerating at tremendous speed. So I knew.
I really believe someone else mentioned was the car had, after that first shot, had come practically to a stop. And later on, in looking back, and I said I could not believe how well-trained Secret Service people reacted so slowly. I would have expected that from ordinary human beings, but I expected that they would have reacted much quicker. Because I've always felt in my mind that I knew the first shot missed. I had never wavered on that, and I see now that it's getting a lot of support. But I said that from day one that the first shot missed. I've never changed my mind on that. I felt the second shot was not a mortal blow. So I felt that had there been proper reaction time, that the man might still be alive today.
Amazing clip here. Charles Perrault, God bless him. We've got Dave Powers on the record here.
Jackie holding on for the stretcher on one side, I'm running on the other.
The president's friend, Dave Powers, now director of the Kennedy Library in Boston, remembers talking to a grief-stricken Bill Greer, the Secret Service agent who drove Kennedy's car. What if they'd sped out of Dealey Plaza after the first shots, but before the fatal one?
I thought it always, and so did he, you know, about Bill, all of the agents were very close to us, and the they felt so bad.
If the driver of the president's car had stepped on the gas after the first two shots,
Yeah. Well, that president would be alive today, and he'd be 71 years old, and he'd be the director here, and and I'd be the assistant.
Can you get more poignant than that? Senator Yarborough.
Back on them and rather slow to react. The Secret Service in the car in front of us kind of casually looked around, looked up at the back of them and rather slow to react. So we went to the underpass and we came up on the other side. I could see them in the president's car, and there was Hill, who I knew as a Secret Service man, signed for leading committees case. He was lying across the back to hang on with his arm over him there so he could hang on top of high speed. His face turned back towards us. Just writhed in agony and beat him with his hand on there like a terrible thing has happened. I knew then he had been shot. And the Secret Service immediately jumped out the minute Johnson said, in fact, he pulled him out and formed a cordon around him. 4 or 5 and one of them said, Mr. President. I knew then Kennedy was dead. In fact, he pulled him out and formed a cordon around him. 4 or 5 and one of them said, Mr. President. I knew then Kennedy was dead. And I walked up to the car where Mrs. Kennedy was still there on the back seat, lying there with her head bowed over, covering her husband's head, his blood running down her leg and on her clothes, and twice saying, they've murdered my husband, they've murdered my husband. It's the most tragic sight of my life.
I just want to say something coming up here, this final little clip here. Charlie Drago mentioned to you the importance of artistic propaganda. It cuts both ways. Well, JFK movie was a tremendous resource for us, and we can have all our problems, all the things we want to talk about that was wrong with the movie, but it did. It galvanized the research community, galvanized the public, got the ARB together, and it did a lot of tremendous good. Well, in the summer of 1993, there was a movie, In the Line of Fire, by Clint Eastwood, and it probably came closest to revealing in a public forum some of the Secret Service's do's and don'ts, and it was officially authorized by the Secret Service because if you look at the end credits of the movie, several prominent Secret Service agents, one of them I spoke to, Jerry Parr, was involved as a consultant on the movie. And here are just some short clips.
Oh my God. That's you. By the way, I'm watching your movie. Movie? November 1963, Kennedy's last days, the arrival in Texas. It must have been exciting for you, Frank. Dallas, the morning of love field. You all look so radiant. JFK, Jakey, and you look so young and able, Frank. What did happen to you that day? Only one agent reacted to the gunfire, and you were closer to Kennedy than he was. You must have looked up at the window of the Texas Book Depository, but you didn't react. Late at night, when the demons come, do you see the rifle coming out of that window, or do you see Kennedy's head being blown apart? If you'd reacted to that first shot, could you have gotten there in time to stop the big bullet? And if you had, that could have been your head being blown apart. Do you wish you'd succeeded, Frank? Or is life too precious?
That about says it all. I'd say with Clint Eastwood and Clint Hill. Little ironic little meshing of poignant clips, I'd say that, and Ralph Yarborough kind of put it all together. Situation now, we've been looking at our suspects, and I think that there's a lot to be said for the work of other prominent authors and researchers. And we can point to our suspects and whatnot, but through my interviews, I have totally debunked the notion that President Kennedy had anything to do with these security insufficiencies, and it boils down to the Secret Service being responsible for them. Like I said, Floyd Boring was the #2 man. He was in charge of planning the Texas trip. So it's basically the nerve center of Floyd Boring, still in Washington, D.C. They send the third stringers of Lloyd Kellerman, Malcolm Kilduff, Rufus Youngblood, who was in charge of LBJ's detail, was the number 2 man. The number 1 man, Stuart Knight, was back in D.C. waiting to be promoted on Monday, November 25th. But what happened after Dallas is Stu Knight went backwards, and Rufus Youngblood went way to be assistant chief. And basically, what happened afterwards was Jerry Bain, the special agent in charge of the White House detail, was not there, was demoted. He even told me he felt it was a demotion in January '65, went to special investigations. Floyd Boring became an inspector, a highly coveted position of power and prestige. Emory Roberts went on to be, get this now, he went on to be an off-record secretary to Johnson. And I'm trying to track this down. There doesn't seem to be anything to it as a coincidence, but there was a Mrs. Juanita Roberts, who was Johnson's chief private secretary, along with Marie Famer. And Bill Greer went on to have major stomach operations. He had major ulcers, and he ended up passing away in early 1985, but he went on disability soon after Dallas. And I think basically when you got to Elm Street, you already had the Secret Service immobilized when they got there, because Henry Ripka is taken off the car. The motorcycles are brought from 18 down to 4 non-flanking units. You have them pressed out of the way so they can't take any professional photographs. You get to Dallas when the shooting starts, Elm Street. First shot signs, Emory Roberts orders them not to move. That immobilizes John Reddy. Clint Hill's late getting there, and that's the reason why I think he shouldered a lot of the so-called survivor's guilt. And John Reddy basically went on to anonymity. And the agents, though, I think have the most to, they have the most to tell us, the most to put on record and say what's going on. Well, Floyd Boring was never interviewed by anybody in official capacity. David Grant, Lawson's oft-forgotten partner, was also not interviewed by anybody. And Bill Greer, he had his testimony before the Warren Commission, filled with a lot of half-truths. He denied looking back at President Kennedy, let alone twice, and he denied everything that we see in the Zapruder film. And basically, the government investigations took everything at face value. So I would just say that in conclusion, I think that we best look twice, if not thrice, at the actions and inactions of the Secret Service. I think they had a lot to do with what went down in Dallas. Thank you.
Can we ask questions? Oh, do it now or do we do it at the end?
I'm wondering if you're on time. Do you think we have time? Surely.
Yes. How many? Let me see it on the hands. Let's take about 5 questions. Go ahead, Vince. You can recognize me.
Oh, okay. Okay, the first one, I got a whole bunch, but I'll get you outside. The first one is that there was a reference in the clip there to a Secret Service agent killed, and I'd seen that before in the early report. Is there any power? I had heard early on.
Secret Service man reported killed. What about that?
Yeah, was there a Secret Service man killed? There was a report in one of your clips, and also in the very early reporting, and I never heard anything more about that.
Okay, well, I just did a detailed article for the journal JFK Politics Quarterly, where I actually exhaustively detailed every press report, every story from AP, UPI, all the networks about the dead agent tale. And what I come down to is that I do not make any hard and fast conclusion that an agent was killed, but what I will say is this: I do not think it was a case of just a mistaken reportage that just like branched out and out. And I do name an agent that I think, if there was an agent that died in Dallas, obviously it was not in Dealey Plaza. I think it might have been in the surrounding area. I named him, and it's Dennis R. Halterman, Halterman. And who was Dennis Halterman? Well, he was one of the agents of the White House detail that was on the Texas trip. Everybody focuses, and an important thing I brought out in my article was, the official line is, all the agents assigned to the motorcade stayed with the motorcade, they did not leave, blah, blah, blah. And this ties in with the agent or agents spotted in Dealey Plaza with the, we always think it's phony Secret Service identification. It could have been genuine. It's sort of a two-part thing. This could tie in both mysteries. It could have been a genuine agent that they spotted. I named the 5 agents in this journal article. It's also in my book. But as far as Dennis Halterman, he is the most logical possibility, because every other agent I have found is accounted for on the Texas trip except for Dennis Halterman. After November 22nd, disappears from the record.
Yeah.
Vin, did Ripka ever give a statement to the Warren Commission, the House Committee, his barber, or anyone about what happened out there?
Okay, there's a report in the 25th volume of the Warren Commission. The Warren Commission volume is not the report. That's the only thing you'll find on Henry Ripka. It's an undated report. I think it's the only undated report. It's only one of two that was not signed off by Special Agent Charge Jerry Bain like the other ones. It's real bland and clear-cut. In fact, compare this. Don't listen to my word. Go to the volumes. Go to volume 18. You'll find all the other Secret Service reports, okay? Compare them to the other 4 reports in volume 25. And including volume 25 is this one of Henry Ripka. And you're going to say to yourself, my God, is this small compared to the other reports, number one. And number two, to answer you succinctly, he doesn't go into any detail about what he did and didn't do. It's a real cut and dry thing. He was following the limousine along, then he was at Love Field when the president was shot, but it doesn't say why he was left behind, this and that. But you will find in Emory Roberts' first report, this is in the Warren Commission Bonds, volume 18, so you have to take my word for it. The first report, he says, Henry Ripka is driving in the flawed car. Second report says, well, I was mistaken, he left behind at Love Field. ARB has released another document that confirms that first report, and Winston Lawson made the same mistake and put Henry Ripka in the flawed car.
Vince, can you clarify whether the guys that used to stand on the car, was it a regular practice every single, before Dallas?
Okay.
Or was this just a one-off that they weren't on the car?
No. What it was is everybody tries to make a black and white issue. The agent's always in the limousine. See, did you hear that press report I played from? It was from ABC. And the guys, they usually walk, it's a combination of walking beside the car, being ready to jump on the car, or being near the rear of the limousine. So to answer your question, on the one hand, no, they weren't always on the rear of the car. But on the other hand, they were always either ready to run on the rear of the car, or they walked beside the car, or they were in between the cars. See, that's why there's all sorts of variables. And when I try to debunk, and pardon me for the technical difficulties at first getting coordinated with the audiovisual, but at first when I showed that still clip and you saw the side running boards, not the ones in the back, but the side running boards that jutted out, well, those weren't used by the agents mainly because in addition to being a hazard, like George Michael brought up a few years ago, not only a hazard for the spectators that were, on the road, but also the agents had no room to run. You're going 30, 40, 50 miles an hour and you only have one little step, so the back of the limousine was more important. And again, it brings down to that presentation this morning. You can play devil's advocate and say there was only, one shooter and he was from the rear. If those agents would have been posted on that, or after the first shot, they would have had an opportunity to run forward and not been immobilized by Emory Roberts. Use your imagination.
Let me go on this slide for the rest of that. I'll come back to you later.
I'm not sure how many actual agents that you interviewed because I didn't follow it. But
21 plus family members.
Okay.
It's contacted about 40 hours to do letter.
For some reason, I don't know if it's something I've read or it was a newspaper article, but it was my impression that they were all drunk the night before, went to bed at 4 o'clock in the morning, and were not charged.
Okay.
Is that correct?
That's partially true. What it boils down to is they visited the Fort Worth Press Club in the cellar. See, the Warren Commission investigated their drinking at the cellar, but the cellar was just like a sort of a, I don't know, what was the term, like a beatnik club, and they didn't drink alcohol there. So they said, okay, well, they didn't drink alcohol there, but they drank at the Fort Worth Press Club. And not only did they drink, 9 of them drank, including 4 in the follow-up car, John Reddy, Clint Hill, Paul Landis, and Glenn Bennett. Those are the 4 in case you want the names. It's in the Warren Commission volume 18 for the cellar reports and Fort Worth Press Club. Make a long story short, no, they were not punished in any way, and Chief Rowley said he did not want to stigmatize their careers and hurt their families. And it turns out now this was actually more of a regular occurrence than we think. Abraham Bolden, in his interviews with me, pretty much told me that a lot of them were all-night drinkers. And let's even just get off the idea that they were drinking. Let's even give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they weren't drinking, although the proof was they were. Well, a lot of them were up to either 3 o'clock in the morning or as late as 5 o'clock in the morning. And they had to report for duty at 7 o'clock in the morning, so they only had 2 to 4 hours of sleep. And they're going to protect the president? You talk about reflexes. That's what they live and breathe on, is their reflexes. These are trained Secret Service agents. And to not have your reflexes from the sleep deprivation, if nothing else, is going to really kill their ability to recognize shots and do things. And obviously, in the time of Emory Roberts' perplexing order to not move, or that gets Clint Hill delayed, that gets John Reddy and the next film making 1 forward step that doesn't mean anything. And
did they admit that to you in your interviews? Or did you ask that?
As far as the drinking?
They ended up all night.
Oh yeah, no, they were drinking it. And Sam Kinney, the driver of the flawed car, and by the way, I got to throw this in, believed that right rear of the head was gone. Total corroboration of Clint Hill, told me it twice in detail, and that's in my book, you'll see that. But, oh yeah, no, he in a roundabout way admitted that they drank, but he made it sound like it was not a regular thing, it was when they were off duty. But Abraham Bolden basically laid it out that this was at least a weekly thing. They went out on binges, and well, it's even a story that the Fort Worth firefighters were in the Hotel Texas as they were drinking. And it was more than 9 agents that were drinking, but the 9 agents had the critical duties in Dallas the next day.
2 firefighters were assigned to protect the president. The Secret Service was under shorthanded.
Have you seen the picture in the book Pictures of the Pain where Greer is supposed to be washing out the car with a bucket and a mop?
Okay, well, no, that's not Greer. I know what the picture you're talking about.
That's what I was...
It was, again, Sam Kinney and George Hickey. George Hickey was more or less standing by. I talked to Sam Kinney all about that. What it was the Dallas police had, they brought a bucket out. Well, actually, it was one of the hospital orderlies, I forget the name of the later, and it's in the reports actually you can hear talking about it. And one of the orderlies brought this bucket out. The Dallas police were nearby because they were putting the bubble top on after the fact when Sam Kinney and George Hickey were standing nearby. Now, they actually didn't clean out the back of the car. Again, that's the folklore. You'll read the books. They actually did not touch the car. So that car was basically inviolate up to and including the time they got to the White House garage. Now, Sam Kinney, being the driver of the flawed car, saw the rear of the head go off. Well, that piece of skull, the right rear piece, the back of the head, the smoking gun, was still in the back of the limousine when they were on the C-130. Hours before the official limousine inspection, it's bound by Sam Kinney. He's only on there with the 76th Air Force Squadron from Charleston, South Carolina. That's all that's on the C-130. And he put in a phone patch with Dr. Berkeley. When they arrived at Andrews, Thomas Mills, and then this will pick up in CD 80. You'll read this that Thomas Mills, Paul Boterney, they all brought the skull fragment over, and that's when everything gets all mixed up. Bottom line is, though, that car was not washed out, and that fragment was still in the back seat during all that time.
What is the bucket for then? Or
well, they were initially, it was a false start to cleaning out the back seat, and according to Sam Kinney, they didn't.
They didn't clean out the back of the car or anything?
They did not clean out the back car at that stage at all. No, it was still the same way. In fact, when you see the color photos of the limousine in the White House garage, and you see it's a bloody mess, but then you might say to yourself, well, it looks like it should be more bloody. Keep in mind, President Kennedy was in that seat, so when the blood and debris came out, he was already covering the area that would have been bloody in that seat. So when you see it, it creates the impression, boy, I thought that would have been more bloody. But
I just wonder why we don't see more blood on the back of the car, but maybe it just, you think it blew off as they were driving back to the airport, or?
Well, I agree with the researcher, Dr. Randy Roberts, and some other people that the back of the head did come off, separate from the scalp. We're talking about scalp and skull. Well, the actual skull particle came out. That's the piece Jackie came and retrieved, brought back into the car. Clint Hill's testimony picked up about the right rear piece. It was lying in the rear seat. Sam Kinney totally confirmed that. And the ironic thing is, Sam Kinney believes there was a conspiracy, but he also believes Oswald acted alone. You figured it out then.
Vince, did you say that Boring is still alive?
Floyd Boring is 81 years old, still alive. I spoke to him twice. He was just on the PBS special on Harry Truman.
Is Robert still alive?
Harry Roberts passed away in the 1960s.
Has the ARRB ever deposed Boring?
No, but
they never suggested it?
They should. I mean, they should depose him.
You're the one.
Is Tom Samlick still here? I don't know. Because Tom Samlick last summer, my audio tapes and some of my interviews, not all the interviews were audio, but some of them were, and those were donated to the National Archives through the auspices of Tom Samlick and the ARB. And I remember mentioning that to him. I also wanted to get under subpoena, so to speak, William Manchester, because he has a whole bunch of interviews with Secret Service agent Jackie Kennedy, and these are on audio tape. And when I talked to him, I'll spare you the details of some other things we can talk about, but basically the one thing was, what about all these tapes? And what a heck of a repository. This was less than a year after the assassination. What about these audio? He goes, all those tapes are under seal, won't be released in my lifetime or yours. Real cantankerous fellow up in Connecticut, and that was the end of that. So that's another person that should be subpoenaed by the ARB.
Have you suggested it in the letter?
Oh yeah, I did it. I did it in a letter and never heard anything. So.
Okay, one last question.
No, that was fine.
That was it?
That was it.
Okay. I wanted to add, by the way, Vince and I have been convinced for quite some time that there was prepared so-called simulated security stripping which was then co-opted. One area that I've been working on, I hope to finish it this year, is the examination of hundreds of newspapers from November 22nd through January 1st. It is very clear that the Associated Press in general and Merriman Smith controlled the news about the assassination in an extraordinary number of papers across the United States. But the person who was not controlled, who was there, is Jack Bell. So if you want to see our contrarian's viewpoint of what happened in the assassination, as distinct from Merriman Smith, look for Jack Bell's stories. The other thing is, I believe there is only one newspaper person with survivor's guilt. I think one newspaper person was told there was to be a simulated security stripping, and you will read his opening line of the security stripping shooting across the United States. It's Merriam Smith. And the opening of that story is 3 shots were fired at the president's motorcade. Do you notice that it's in the passive voice? That the shots were at the motorcade? That it doesn't say anything about a sniper killing the president? I believe that is a pre-prepared line that Merriam Smith wrote because he was given prior word that there was to be a simulated security attack. I can't prove that, but I think you know that survivor's guilt finally, if that's true, meant that Merriam Smith ended his own life. He was, remember, a suicide. We have